The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty main street of Salida, Colorado, and Hannah Vance clutched her carpetbag tighter, her knuckles white beneath her worn gloves as she prepared herself for the inevitable disgust she would see in people's eyes when they looked at her swollen belly. She was 6 months along, unmarried, and about to throw herself on the mercy of an aunt she had never met, a woman who might very well slam the door in her face the moment she understood the shameful circumstances that had driven Hannah west from Philadelphia in the spring of 1882. The driver helped her down with a grunt, barely looking at her face as he deposited her trunk on the wooden sidewalk with a thud that sent dust swirling into the bright afternoon air. Hannah stood there for a moment, blinking against the harsh sunlight that was so different from the filtered gray skies of home. The mountains rose up around the small town like protective walls, their peaks still touched with snow despite it being May, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke and horse. She smoothed her dark traveling dress over her middle, the fabric stretched tight no matter how many times she had let out the seams during the long journey. Her auburn hair was coming loose from its pins, curling around her face in the dry heat, and she knew she must look exactly like what she was, a fallen woman with nowhere else to go. The main street was busy with afternoon activity. Cowboys on horseback rode past, their spurs jingling. Women in calico dresses walked in pairs, their bonnets shading their faces. A group of miners stood outside the saloon, their clothes dusty from whatever work they had been doing in the hills. Hannah felt every eye turn toward her, felt the weight of their judgment like physical things pressing against her skin. She forced herself to move, picking up her carpetbag and leaving the trunk for now. The hotel clerk had told her during their brief stop for water that there was a boarding house on the north end of town, run by a Prudence Carmichael. That would be her aunt, her mother's sister who had moved west 30 years ago and never returned. The letters Hannah had sent ahead might not have even arrived yet. She might be walking into a complete surprise, and surprises were rarely welcome when they came in her particular condition. The boarding house was a 2-story structure painted white, with a wide porch and lace curtains in the windows. It looked neat and respectable, which somehow made Hannah's stomach twist even harder. Respectable places did not welcome girls like her. She climbed the steps slowly, each one feeling like a mountain unto itself. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal a woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled back severely from a lined face. Her eyes, the same gray-blue as Hannah's mother's, swept over Hannah from head to toe, lingering on her middle. "You would be Hannah," the woman said, her voice flat. "Yes, madam, I wrote to you. I am not sure if you received my letters." "I received them." Prudence Carmichael did not move from the doorway. "You did not mention your condition." Hannah's throat closed up. She had known this would happen, had prepared herself for it during every mile of the journey, but now that the moment was here, she found she could not speak. She simply stood there, waiting for the door to close in her face, waiting for the final proof that she was as alone in the world as she feared. "I have nowhere else to go," she finally managed to whisper. "My father disowned me. My mother is dead these past 3 years. I can work. I can earn my keep. I am clean and healthy and I will not be any trouble, I swear it." Prudence studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped aside. "Come in, then. No sense discussing your private business on the porch for everyone to hear." Relief flooded through Hannah so powerfully, she nearly stumbled as she crossed the threshold. The interior of the boarding house was as neat as the exterior, with polished wood floors and simple furnishings that spoke of care and pride. Prudence led her into a small sitting room and gestured for her to sit. "I will be plain with you," Prudence said, settling into a chair across from Hannah. "This is a respectable establishment. I rent rooms to miners and ranch hands and the occasional traveling salesman. I have a reputation in this town. Your presence here in your condition will damage that reputation." Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes but forced them back. She would not cry. She had cried enough during the past 6 months to last a lifetime. "I understand. I will leave in the morning." "Thank you for at least hearing me out." "I did not say I was turning you away," Prudence interrupted. "I said it will damage my reputation. But you are blood, and I will not turn away blood. Your mother was dear to me once before we lost touch. For her sake, if nothing else, I will give you a roof over your head." The tears came then, despite Hannah's best efforts. "Thank you," she choked out. "Thank you so much. I will work harder than anyone. I will make it up to you." "You will indeed work," Prudence said, but her voice had softened slightly. "I am not running a charity. You will help with the cooking and cleaning and laundry. You will earn your keep until that baby comes, and then we will figure out what happens next. But you will mind me on one thing. You will hold your head high in this town. You made a mistake, but you are not the first and will not be the last. You will not slink around like a beaten dog. Is that understood?" Hannah nodded, wiping at her eyes. "Yes, madam. Good. Now you look half dead from travel. Let me show you to your room. You can rest a bit before dinner." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the mountains. Hannah sank down onto the bed and finally let herself breathe. She had made it. She was not sleeping on the street or in some horrible workhouse. She had a chance, slim as it might be, to build some kind of life for herself and her child. That evening, after a simple dinner of stew and bread, Prudence explained the routine of the house. Hannah would rise at dawn to help prepare breakfast for the boarders. Then there would be laundry, cleaning, mending, whatever needed doing. Prudence ran a tight ship, but she was not unkind, and Hannah found herself grateful for the structure, for the distraction from her own thoughts. The next morning, Hannah rose before the sun and made her way to the kitchen. Prudence was already there, stoking the fire in the stove and setting out ingredients for biscuits. They worked in companionable silence, and Hannah found a strange comfort in the simple tasks. Measuring flour, kneading dough, frying bacon. These were things she knew how to do, things that made sense in a world that had stopped making sense the day Thomas had told her he was already married and would not be leaving his wife, no matter what promises he had made. The boarders began trickling down as the smell of food filled the house. There were 5 men currently staying at Prudence's, 2 miners, a store clerk, and 2 ranch hands from a spread north of town. They were polite enough, if curious about the new woman in the house. Hannah kept her eyes down and focused on serving the food, pouring coffee, clearing plates. One of the ranch hands, a young man with sandy hair and a sunburned face, lingered after the others had left for their various jobs. "Madam," he said to Prudence, "Mr. Keller asked me to mention he is looking to hire some temporary help at the ranch. One of his regular hands broke his leg pretty badly and will be laid up for months. If you know anyone who needs work, he is paying fair wages." "I will keep that in mind," Prudence said. "Thank you, Daniel." After Daniel left, Prudence turned to Hannah. "You should know that Kenneth Keller owns the largest ranch in this area. He is a good man, fair employer. If you ever need anything, he is someone you can trust." Hannah filed the information away, though she could not imagine why she would ever have cause to interact with a ranch owner. She was here to work quietly, have her baby, and figure out what came next. Meeting people, especially respectable people who might judge her, was not part of her plan. The days began to settle into a rhythm. Hannah worked from dawn until well after dark, her hands constantly busy with washing, cooking, mending, scrubbing. Prudence was a demanding taskmaster, but Hannah welcomed it. When she was working, she did not have to think about the future, about the tiny life growing inside her, about how she would manage once the baby came. The other women in town were less charitable than Prudence. Hannah could feel their stares when she went to the general store for supplies. She heard the whispers, saw the way they pulled their skirts aside as if her fallen state might somehow be contagious. Some were openly hostile, their faces twisted with righteous disgust. Others just looked through her as if she did not exist. Hannah held her head high as Prudence had instructed, but it was hard. Every stare felt like a physical blow. Every whispered comment about loose morals and shameful behavior cut deep. She had been foolish and naive, yes, but she had also been in love, or at least she had thought she was. Thomas had been charming and attentive and full of pretty promises. She had believed him when he said he would marry her. She had believed him right up until the moment she told him about the baby, and he revealed the truth. He had a wife and 3 children back in New York, and she, Hannah, had been nothing more than a diversion. 2 weeks after Hannah's arrival in Salida, Prudence sent her to the mercantile with a list of supplies needed for the boarding house. Hannah took the list and the money and steeled herself for the ordeal. The walk to town was pleasant enough, with the morning air still cool and fresh, but her stomach knotted as she approached the store. Inside, several women were already shopping, and their conversation stopped the moment Hannah entered. She felt her cheeks burn but kept her spine straight as she moved to the counter where Mr. Holbrook, the owner, was measuring out flour for a customer. She waited her turn, studying the list Prudence had given her, trying to ignore the weight of hostile eyes on her back. When Mr. Holbrook finally turned to her, his expression was coolly professional. "What can I do for you, miss?" Hannah handed him the list and watched as he began gathering the items. She was vaguely aware of the women behind her resuming their conversation, their voices deliberately loud enough for her to hear. "It is a disgrace that Prudence Carmichael allows that kind of woman in her establishment," one said. "What sort of example does it set?" "No better than she should be," another agreed. "Coming here with her sin on display for everyone to see. In my day, such women were sent away to spare decent folk the sight." Hannah's hands trembled as she counted out the money for Mr. Holbrook. She just needed to get through this. Just needed to take the supplies and get back to the boarding house where she could hide away from the judgment and scorn. "She probably does not even know who the father is," the first woman continued. "That type never do." Something inside Hannah snapped. She turned, meeting the eyes of the woman who had spoken, a plump matron in an expensive dress. "I know exactly who the father is," Hannah said quietly but firmly. "He was a man who lied to me, who told me he loved me and would marry me. I was foolish to believe him, yes, but I loved him and thought he loved me. That does not make me evil or dirty, it makes me human. And perhaps, before you judge too harshly, you should consider whether you have ever made a mistake, ever trusted the wrong person, ever been less than perfect." The women stared at her, mouths agape at her audacity. Hannah turned back to gather her packages, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had never spoken back like that before, had always accepted the judgment as her due, but something about this place, about Prudence's firm insistence that she not slink around ashamed, had given her a spark of defiance. She was halfway to the door when it swung open and a man walked in. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair beneath a worn Stetson and eyes the color of warm honey. His face was tanned and weathered, with the kind of lines that spoke of years spent outdoors, squinting into the sun. He wore dusty ranch clothes and had a quiet confidence about him that made people instinctively step aside. Their eyes met for just a moment, as Hannah tried to edge past him with her armload of packages. She expected to see the same judgment, the same disgust she had seen in so many other faces. Instead, he simply tipped his hat to her and said, "Madam," in a deep, warm voice before moving aside to give her room. It was such a simple gesture, such a normal, courteous thing, that Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes. She mumbled a thank you and hurried out into the street, gulping in the fresh air like a drowning woman breaking the surface. She did not know it then, but the man who had tipped his hat to her was Kenneth Zachary, owner of the largest ranch in the area. And she did not know that he had noticed her, really noticed her, in a way that would change both their lives forever. Kenneth stood inside the mercantile, only half listening as Mr. Holbrook greeted him. His mind was still on the young woman who had just left, the one with the auburn hair and eyes full of hurt and defiance. He had heard the tail end of what the gossiping women had been saying, and he had seen the way the young woman had held her head high despite the cruelty. "That was the Vance girl," one of the women was saying to another. "Living at Prudence Carmichael's place. Can you imagine? Prudence should know better," the other replied. "Harboring such a woman." Kenneth turned to face them, and something in his expression made both women fall silent. "Seems to me," he said quietly, "that Prudence Carmichael is doing what Christians are supposed to do, showing charity and compassion. You ladies might want to try it sometime." He placed his order with Holbrook and left, not waiting to see their reactions. He had little patience for meanness disguised as righteousness. He had seen too much of it in his 32 years, and it never failed to irritate him. As he rode back toward his ranch, Kenneth found his thoughts returning to the young woman. There had been something about her, a quality he could not quite name. Strength, maybe, or courage. She was clearly in a difficult situation, but she had not crumbled under the weight of it. He admired that. The rocking Z Ranch sprawled across several thousand acres of prime grazing land, north of Salida. Kenneth had inherited it from his father 10 years earlier and had built it into one of the most successful operations in the area. He employed a dozen hands year-round, more during roundup and branding. It was a good life, if a lonely one. He had been engaged once, years ago, to a girl from Denver, but she had taken one look at the isolated ranch and the hard work involved, and had decided she preferred city life. Kenneth had not blamed her exactly, but he had not tried again either. Over the next few days, Kenneth found himself thinking about the young woman more than he should. He told himself it was simple curiosity, or perhaps just sympathy for someone in a hard situation. But the truth, if he was honest with himself, was that he had been drawn to her in a way he had not been drawn to anyone in a long time. He had business in town the following week, and as he rode down the main street, he found himself looking for a glimpse of auburn hair. He did not see her, though, and felt oddly disappointed. It was Daniel, one of his younger hands, who mentioned her next. They were working on repairing a section of fence, and Daniel said casually, "That new woman at Miss Prudence's, the one with the baby coming. She seems nice. She served breakfast yesterday morning and she was real polite." Kenneth hammered in a fence post with more force than necessary. "I suppose some of the folks in town are pretty hard on her," Daniel continued. "Does not seem quite fair, you know. We have all made mistakes." "That we have," Kenneth agreed. "Miss Prudence says she is a hard worker. Works from dawn to dark without complaining," Daniel said. "I admire that." Kenneth did too, though he did not say so out loud. He just kept working, trying to ignore the way his curiosity about Hannah Vance kept growing. Back at the boarding house, Hannah had settled into the routine of her new life. She rose before dawn, helped prepare breakfast, served the boarders, cleaned up, did laundry, helped with lunch, mended clothes, helped with dinner, cleaned up again and fell into bed exhausted. Her back ached constantly now as her belly grew larger, and her ankles swelled by the end of each day, but she pushed through it. She had to. She had no other choice. Prudence was pleased with her work, at least. The older woman had warmed to Hannah considerably over the past few weeks, and occasionally she would insist that Hannah sit down and rest while she took over a task. Those moments of kindness meant more to Hannah than she could express. One evening in early June, as Hannah was washing dishes after dinner, Prudence came into the kitchen with a thoughtful expression. "I have been thinking," she said. "You need some proper maternity dresses. That one you are wearing is about to burst at the seams." Hannah looked down at herself and flushed. "I have let it out as much as I can." "I have some fabric put aside," Prudence continued. "Good sturdy cotton. We can make you a couple of dresses that will see you through to the birth. You are handy with a needle." "Yes, madam." "Good. We will work on it in the evenings. You cannot go around looking like a ragamuffin. What would people think of my establishment?" Hannah smiled slightly. She knew by now that Prudence's gruff exterior hid a warm heart. "Thank you." They spent the next several evenings cutting and sewing, and Hannah found herself talking more than she had in months. She told Prudence about her mother, about growing up in Philadelphia, about her work as a seamstress before everything fell apart. She did not talk about Thomas, and Prudence did not press her. "You will have a good life here if you work for it," Prudence said one evening as they sewed by lamplight. "This town can be harsh, but it is also fair. You prove yourself to be a decent, hard-working person and people will come around." "Most of them anyway." "I hope so," Hannah said softly. "I want my child to have a good life, better than I have given it so far." "You are giving it life and love," Prudence said firmly. "That is no small thing." The weather grew warmer as June progressed, and Hannah began to feel the heat more acutely. Her new dresses helped, at least. They were simple calico garments with high waists and plenty of room for her growing belly. Prudence had even added some ribbon trim to make them pretty, a small kindness that had made Hannah tear up. It was a Saturday in mid-June when everything changed. Hannah was hanging laundry in the backyard, struggling to reach the clothesline with her unwieldy belly in the way, when she heard horses approaching the front of the house. She thought nothing of it until Prudence called her name. Hannah wiped her damp hands on her apron and hurried around to the front, where she found Prudence talking to a tall man on horseback. It took Hannah a moment to recognize him as the man from the mercantile, the one who had tipped his hat to her with such casual courtesy. "Hannah," Prudence said, "this is Kenneth Zachary. He owns the Rocking Z Ranch north of town. Kenneth, this is my niece, Hannah Vance." Kenneth removed his hat, revealing dark hair slightly damp with sweat. "Madam," he said, nodding to Hannah, "pleased to meet you properly." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Zachary," Hannah managed, acutely aware of her flushed face and the sweat-dampened hair clinging to her neck. "Kenneth has a proposition," Prudence said, and something in her tone made Hannah look at her sharply. "He needs someone to come out to the ranch a few days a week to do some cooking and help his housekeeper with the heavy work. His current housekeeper, Mrs. Bailey, is getting on in years and having trouble keeping up with cooking for all the hands. I pay fair wages," Kenneth added. "And I would send someone to fetch you and bring you back, so you would not have to manage the trip on your own." Hannah stared at them both. "You want to hire me, if you are interested," Kenneth said. "Mrs. Bailey is a fine cook, but cooking for 15 men 3 times a day is getting to be too much for her. I thought having someone to help a few days a week might ease the burden. And Miss Prudence mentioned you are an excellent cook." Hannah glanced at Prudence, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I am interested," Hannah said slowly. "But I should be clear, Mr. Zachary. I am sure you have heard the talk about me, about my situation. If you would prefer not to have someone like me working for you, I understand." Kenneth's honey-colored eyes met hers steadily. "I do not give a damn about gossip, Miss Vance. Pardon my language. What I care about is whether you can cook and whether you are willing to work hard. Mrs. Bailey says she is desperate for help, and Miss Prudence vouches for your character and your work ethic. That is good enough for me." Something loosened in Hannah's chest, some tight knot of fear and shame that had been there for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. Here was a man, a successful, respected man, offering her work, not despite her situation exactly, but without letting it define her, as if she were simply a person who could cook, rather than a shameful woman who deserved nothing but scorn. "Then yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "I would be happy to help." "Excellent," Kenneth said, putting his hat back on. "Can you start Monday? I will send Daniel to fetch you around mid-morning. He can bring you back in the late afternoon." "Monday is fine," Hannah agreed. After Kenneth rode away, Prudence turned to Hannah with a satisfied expression. "That will be good for you. Get you out of this house, earn you some extra money. Kenneth Zachary is a good man, one of the best. You will be treated fairly there." Hannah helped Prudence finish the laundry, her mind whirling. She had steady work, beyond just what she did at the boarding house. She would be earning her own money, building something toward a future for herself and her baby. For the first time since she had discovered she was pregnant, she felt a tiny spark of hope. Monday morning dawned clear and warm. Hannah dressed in one of her new calico dresses, this one a soft blue that Prudence said brought out her eyes. She braided her hair neatly and tried to calm the butterflies in her stomach. She would be cooking for a dozen ranch hands. They would probably be like the men in town, full of judgment and scorn. But she would bear it. She had to. Daniel arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, driving a small wagon. He helped Hannah up onto the seat with a cheerful greeting, and they set off, the wagon bouncing along the rutted road north out of town. Daniel kept up a steady stream of friendly chatter, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranch. "Mrs. Bailey is going to be so relieved you are coming," he said. "She has been run ragged trying to keep up with all the cooking. Boss tried to hire someone from town, but nobody was interested in coming out to the ranch regular. Too far, they said." "How far is it?" Hannah asked. "About 5 miles. Takes near an hour by wagon, though you can ride it in half that on horseback if you are in a hurry." The ranch, when they arrived, was more impressive than Hannah had imagined. The main house was a sprawling log structure with a wide porch and a stone chimney. There were several outbuildings, a bunkhouse, a barn, corrals, and what looked like storage sheds. Horses grazed in a nearby pasture, and in the distance, Hannah could see cattle dotting the hillsides. Daniel helped her down from the wagon and led her to the main house. Inside, it was cool and dim after the bright sunlight. The main room was large, with a massive stone fireplace and comfortable-looking furniture. Everything was neat but had a distinctly masculine feel, with no frills or decorations. "Mrs. Bailey," Daniel called, and a small, round woman with white hair appeared from what Hannah assumed was the kitchen. "You must be Hannah," Mrs. Bailey said, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Oh, thank heavens! I have been praying for help. Come in, come in. Let me show you around." The kitchen was large and well-equipped, with a massive iron stove, a long work table, and shelves stocked with supplies. Mrs. Bailey explained the routine. Breakfast was served at dawn in the bunkhouse. Lunch was at noon, also in the bunkhouse. Dinner was at 6, and Kenneth usually ate in the main house while the hands ate in the bunkhouse. "Mr. Zachary is not particular," Mrs. Bailey said. "As long as there is plenty of it and it is hot, the men are happy. Beef, beans, potatoes, biscuits. They go through bread like you would not believe, And pies. They love pies. Hannah rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Mrs. Bailey had already started a stew for dinner, so Hannah focused on making bread. She lost herself in the familiar rhythm of kneading dough, and by the time Kenneth came in around noon, she had 6 loaves rising and was starting on a dried apple pie. Kenneth stopped in the kitchen doorway, his hat in his hands. "Everything going all right?" "Just fine, Mr. Zachary," Mrs. Bailey said. "Hannah here is a godsend. Look at all this bread, and she is making pie." Kenneth's eyes met Hannah's and he smiled slightly. "I appreciate the help, Miss Vance." "I am happy to do it," Hannah said, suddenly shy under his gaze. There was something about him, something solid and reassuring that made her feel safer than she had felt in a long time. He nodded and left, and Hannah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The day passed quickly. Hannah and Mrs. Bailey worked together easily, falling into a comfortable rhythm. When it was time to serve dinner to the hands in the bunkhouse, Hannah helped Mrs. Bailey carry the heavy pots of stew and the fresh bread. The men were polite, calling her madam and thanking her for the food. A few stared at her belly, but none made rude comments, at least not where she could hear. Kenneth ate in the main house, and Mrs. Bailey insisted Hannah join them at the table. "No sense you eating alone in the kitchen," she said firmly. It felt strange, sitting at a table with Kenneth Zachary, eating the food she had helped prepare. Kenneth did not seem uncomfortable, though. He asked about her day, about whether Mrs. Bailey had worked her too hard, about whether she felt up to coming back Wednesday. "I would be happy to come back," Hannah assured him. "I enjoyed today," and she had. For the first time in months she had felt useful, valued, not judged or scorned, just allowed to work and be normal. It was a gift she had not known how much she needed. Daniel drove her back to the boarding house as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Hannah was tired, but in a good way, the kind of tired that came from honest work well done. Prudence was waiting on the porch. "How did it go?" "It went well," Hannah said, and found herself smiling. "Really well." Over the next few weeks, a pattern established itself. Hannah worked at the boarding house 4 days a week and at the ranch 3 days. The extra income was a blessing, and she carefully saved every penny, thinking about the future, about what she would need when the baby came. But more than the money, what she treasured was the way she felt at the ranch. Kenneth treated her with respect, with a kindness that never felt like pity. Mrs. Bailey treated her like a friend, chattering away as they cooked and sharing stories of her own life. Even the ranch hands, rough men who spent their days doing hard physical labor, were unfailingly polite. Kenneth, she noticed, went out of his way to make her comfortable. He made sure there was a comfortable chair in the kitchen where she could sit when her back ached. He had Daniel take her home earlier on days when she looked particularly tired. He never mentioned her condition, never asked prying questions, just treated her like any other employee. And slowly, as the days turned into weeks, Hannah realized she was developing feelings for him. It started small. The way her heart would beat a little faster when she heard his boots on the porch, the way she found herself watching for him through the kitchen window, the way his rare smiles made her feel warm all over. She told herself it was foolish, that she had no business developing feelings for anyone, especially not a man like Kenneth Zachary who could have his pick of respectable women. But her heart did not listen to reason. Kenneth, for his part, was fighting his own battle. He had hired Hannah to help Mrs. Bailey, yes, but also because he had wanted to help her, to do something for this woman who had touched him in a way he did not fully understand. He had not expected to find himself thinking about her constantly, looking forward to the days when she would be at the ranch, noticing little things like the way she hummed while she worked or the way she pushed her hair back from her face with the back of her flour-dusted hand. He knew it was complicated. She was pregnant with another man's child, vulnerable and dependent on the charity of her aunt. Getting involved with her would be messy and complicated and probably a mistake. But the more time he spent around her, the more he found himself not caring about any of that. He cared about her quiet strength, her resilience, the way she could make Mrs. Bailey laugh, the gentleness in her eyes when she rested her hand on her belly. It was late July when things came to a head. Hannah was nearly 7 months along now, her belly large and round. She tired more easily, and even simple tasks left her breathless. Kenneth had suggested she stop coming to the ranch, but she had refused. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she had said firmly. "I can still work." This particular day was brutally hot. Hannah had been at the ranch since mid-morning, helping Mrs. Bailey put up vegetables from the garden. The kitchen was stifling despite open windows and doors, and Hannah felt like she could not get enough air. She was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of boiling tomatoes when the room suddenly tilted. She grabbed for the edge of the stove to steady herself, and the next thing she knew, Kenneth was there, his strong hands gripping her arms, supporting her weight. "Easy," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I have got you." He guided her to a chair and pressed her down into it, then crouched in front of her, his hands on her knees, his face level with hers. "Are you all right? Should I get the doctor?" Hannah shook her head, mortified. "I am fine. Just got a little dizzy from the heat." "You are working too hard," Kenneth said, and there was an edge to his voice she had never heard before. "You should be resting, not standing over a hot stove in this heat." "I am fine," Hannah insisted, though in truth she felt shaky and weak. Mrs. Bailey appeared with a glass of water. "Drink this, dear. Kenneth is right. You have been pushing yourself too hard." Hannah sipped the water, very aware of Kenneth still crouched in front of her, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "That is it," Kenneth said, standing up. "You are done for today. Daniel will take you home, and you are not coming back until this heat breaks and you have had some proper rest." "Mr. Zachary, I need this work," Hannah protested. "I need the money." "I will pay you anyway," Kenneth said firmly. "Consider it sick leave, but I will not have you collapsing in my kitchen because I was too stubborn to insist you rest." "I cannot accept pay for work I have not done," Hannah said. "Then consider it a loan," Kenneth said, his voice gentler now. "One you can pay back later if you insist. But right now, you are going to go back to town and you are going to rest. Please, Hannah, for the sake of your baby if not yourself." It was the first time he had said her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart skip. "All right," she whispered. "I will rest." Kenneth sent for Daniel, and soon Hannah was in the wagon heading back to town. She felt guilty for leaving Mrs. Bailey to handle everything alone, but she also felt deeply, overwhelmingly touched by Kenneth's concern. He cared about her welfare. He saw her as a person worth protecting, worth caring for. Back at the boarding house, Prudence took one look at her and ordered her to bed. "You look half dead, child. You have been working too hard." Hannah did not argue. She climbed the stairs to her room, lay down on the narrow bed, and let herself cry. Not from sadness, exactly, but from the overwhelming feeling of being cared for. Kenneth had looked at her with such concern, such genuine worry. When was the last time anyone had looked at her like that? When was the last time anyone had put her welfare first? She thought about Thomas, about how different he had been. Thomas had been charming and attentive when it suited him, but the moment things became inconvenient, he had disappeared. Kenneth was the opposite. Steady, reliable, kind without expecting anything in return, and she was falling in love with him. God help her, she was falling in love with a man who deserved so much better than a pregnant, disgraced woman who came with nothing but trouble and scandal. Over the next week, Hannah rested as ordered. The heat broke, thankfully, and she began to feel more like herself. Kenneth sent Daniel to check on her twice, which made Prudence raise her eyebrows significantly but say nothing. When Hannah finally returned to the ranch the following week, Kenneth was waiting on the porch. He came down the steps as Daniel helped her from the wagon. "You are sure you are feeling better?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "Much better," Hannah assured him. "I promise I will not overdo it." "You better not, or Mrs. Bailey and I will both have your hide," Kenneth said, but he was smiling slightly. Inside, Mrs. Bailey greeted her with a hug and immediately started fussing. "You just sit yourself down and do light tasks today. I will not have you wearing yourself out." Hannah sat at the work table and started peeling apples for pies, and Mrs. Bailey chattered away as she worked on preparing beef for stew. It felt good to be back, to be doing something useful again. Kenneth came into the kitchen mid-morning with a package. "This came for you," he said, handing it to Hannah. "Daniel picked it up from the post office this morning." Hannah took the package, surprised. She was not expecting anything. She opened it carefully and found a bolt of soft flannel, perfect for making baby clothes, and a note from Prudence. "For the little one. Aunt P." Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. Prudence had sent the fabric to the ranch so Hannah would have it here, where she spent so much of her time. It was such a thoughtful gesture, such a clear sign that people were thinking of her, caring about her and her baby. "That is nice," Mrs. Bailey said, peering at the flannel. "We'll make lovely little gowns." "It is very kind of my aunt," Hannah managed. Kenneth was still standing there, and when Hannah looked up at him, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Something tender and fierce all at once. "If you need anything else for the baby," he said quietly, "anything at all, you let me know." "You have already done so much," Hannah whispered. "Not enough," Kenneth said, and then he turned and left as if he had said more than he intended. Hannah stared after him, her heart racing. What had he meant by that? The day passed pleasantly, and as evening approached and it was time for Hannah to head back to town, she gathered her things and said goodbye to Mrs. Bailey. Kenneth was waiting by the wagon, his hat in his hands. "Hannah," he said as Daniel climbed up into the driver's seat. "Could I talk to you for a moment, privately?" Hannah's heart leaped into her throat. "Of course." They walked a short distance from the wagon, stopping under a large cottonwood tree that provided some shade. Kenneth turned to face her, and she was struck again by how tall he was, how solid. She felt safe near him in a way she had never felt with Thomas. "I have been thinking," Kenneth said, his voice low, "about your situation, about what is going to happen when the baby comes." Hannah felt her defenses rise. "I will manage. Prudence says I can stay as long as I need to." "I am sure she does," Kenneth said. "But will that be enough? Will you have what you need, not just a roof over your head but real security, a future?" Hannah swallowed hard. "I do not know," she admitted, "but I will figure it out. I have to." Kenneth was quiet for a moment, looking out at the mountains in the distance. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. "What if there was another option?" "What do you mean?" He turned back to her, and the intensity in his honey-colored eyes took her breath away. "I am not a man who is good with pretty words. I am better at actions than speeches. But I need you to understand something. These past couple of months, having you here, getting to know you, it has meant something to me. You mean something to me." Hannah could barely breathe. "Mr. Zachary." "Kenneth, please call me Kenneth." "Kenneth," she whispered. "I do not understand what you are saying." "I am saying that I care about you, about what happens to you and your baby. I am saying that I would like to help if you would let me. Not as an employer or a charity case, but as something more." Hannah's hand went to her belly, an instinctive protective gesture. "You do not know what you are saying. You are a respected man. I am ruined. My presence in your life would bring you nothing but scandal." "I do not care about scandal," Kenneth said fiercely. "I care about you. I see who you are, Hannah. I see your strength and your courage and your kindness. I see the way you work without complaining, the way you hold your head high even when people are cruel to you. I see the way you protect that baby inside you like a fierce mama bear, and I am telling you that I want to be part of your life, if you will have me." Tears were streaming down Hannah's face now. "Why? Why would you want me? I am carrying another man's child. I come with nothing but trouble." Kenneth stepped closer, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You come with yourself. That is more than enough. And as for the baby, I would be honored to raise that child as my own. Every child deserves a father who loves them." Hannah was shaking. This was everything she had not dared to hope for, offered to her by a man who had shown her nothing but kindness. But she had to be sure. She could not bear it if he was acting out of pity. "Are you offering this out of pity?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because you feel sorry for me?" "No," Kenneth said firmly. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I am offering this because I have fallen in love with you. Somewhere between watching you knead bread and hearing you laugh at one of Mrs. Bailey's stories, and seeing the way your whole face lights up when you talk about the baby. I fell in love with you, Hannah Vance, and I would be honored, deeply honored, if you would consider marrying me." Hannah could not speak. Her throat was too tight, her heart too full. Kenneth was looking at her with such hope, such vulnerability, that she knew he was telling the truth. This was not pity. This was real. "I am frightened," she whispered. "I trusted once before, and it ended so badly. I am frightened to trust again." "I understand that," Kenneth said. "And I am not asking you to decide right this moment. Take your time, think about it, but know this: I am not going anywhere. I am not Thomas. I do not make promises I cannot keep. If I tell you I love you, I mean it. If I ask you to marry me, I mean forever." Hannah searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity, but found only honest devotion. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about it," Kenneth said softly. "That is all I ask." "I will think about it," Hannah agreed, though in truth her heart had already made the decision. Her head just needed time to catch up. Kenneth helped her up into the wagon, and Daniel drove her back to town. Hannah sat in silence, her mind whirling. Kenneth Zachary loved her. Kenneth Zachary wanted to marry her. It seemed impossible, like something out of a dream. When she got back to the boarding house, Prudence took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" Hannah burst into tears and told her everything. When she finished, Prudence sat back in her chair with a satisfied expression. "That man has been in love with you for weeks. Anyone with eyes could see it. I thought he was just being kind. He was being kind. Men like Kenneth Zachary are always kind. But the way he looks at you, child, that is not just kindness. That is love." "But what do I do?" Hannah asked helplessly. "Can I really marry him? Can I really accept such an incredible offer?" "The question is not can you," Prudence said. "The question is, do you love him? Because if you do, then you would be a fool to refuse." Did she love him? Hannah thought about the way her heart raced when she heard his voice, the way she felt safe and protected in his presence, the way she admired his integrity, his kindness, his steady reliability, the way she caught herself daydreaming about a life with him, about raising her baby with him beside her. "Yes," she whispered, "I love him." "Then there is your answer," Prudence said. Hannah did not sleep that night. She lay in bed, one hand on her belly where the baby kicked and rolled, and thought about the future. She had come to Salida expecting rejection, expecting to spend the rest of her life as a social pariah, raising her child alone. Instead, she had found Prudence's grudging acceptance that had turned to genuine affection. She had found work that made her feel valued, and she had found Kenneth, who looked at her as if she were precious, as if her past did not matter, only her future. By morning, she had made her decision. She asked Prudence if she could borrow the wagon, and Prudence, understanding immediately, agreed. Hannah drove herself out to the ranch, her heart pounding with nerves and excitement. Kenneth was in the barn when she arrived, working on repairing a saddle. He looked up in surprise when she walked in. "Hannah, is everything all right? You are not supposed to be here today." "I needed to see you," Hannah said, twisting her hands together nervously. "I needed to give you my answer." Kenneth set down the saddle slowly and stood up. "All right." Hannah took a deep breath. "You asked me to marry you. You said I could take my time to think about it, but I do not need more time. I know my answer." Kenneth waited, barely breathing, his whole body tense. "Yes," Hannah said, her voice strong despite her nerves. "Yes, I will marry you. If you truly meant what you said." The smile that broke across Kenneth's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and took her hands in his. "I meant every word. You will not regret this, Hannah. I swear to you." "I know," Hannah said, and she did know. This man would keep his promises. This man would stand by her. Kenneth raised her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. When will you marry me?" "As soon as possible," Hannah said. "Before I get too big to waddle down the aisle." Kenneth laughed, a deep, joyous sound. "Tomorrow, if you want. I will ride into town right now and talk to the minister." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church. Prudence stood up for Hannah and Daniel stood up for Kenneth. Mrs. Bailey came, as did a few of the ranch hands. Most of the town stayed away, still scandalized by Hannah's condition, but Hannah did not care. She stood beside Kenneth, her hand in his, and promised to love and honor him for the rest of her days, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Kenneth's vows were simple but heartfelt. "I promise to protect you and cherish you and provide for you and the baby. I promise to be the kind of husband you deserve, the kind of father your child deserves. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kenneth kissed her gently, his hand cupping her face with such tenderness that Hannah felt tears slide down her cheeks. They went back to the ranch afterward, and Kenneth carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests about her weight. "You are perfect," he murmured against her hair. "And you are mine now. Let me be a little foolish." That night, Kenneth was patient and gentle, mindful of her condition. He held her close afterward, his hand resting on her belly, and when the baby kicked, he laughed in wonder. "Strong, little one, is not it?" "Very strong," Hannah agreed, feeling more content than she had ever felt in her life. She had expected rejection and scorn. Instead, she had found acceptance and devotion. She had found a home. She had found love. The next few weeks were a period of adjustment. Hannah moved her few belongings from the boarding house to the ranch. Prudence hugged her tight when she left and made her promise to visit often. "You have become like a daughter to me," Prudence said gruffly. "I will expect regular visits, especially after that baby comes." At the ranch, Hannah settled into her role as Kenneth's wife. Mrs. Bailey was delighted, declaring that she had known from the start that Kenneth was sweet on Hannah. The ranch hands were respectful and welcoming. Hannah felt like she was building a real family, something she had not had since her mother died. Kenneth was everything a husband should be. Attentive without being smothering, affectionate without being overwhelming. He made it clear in 100 small ways that she was valued and loved. He rubbed her aching back in the evenings. He insisted she rest in the afternoons. He talked to her about the ranch business, asking her opinion, treating her like a true partner. And slowly, as the days passed, Hannah began to truly believe that this was real, that Kenneth loved her not despite who she was, but because of who she was, that her past did not define her future, that she deserved this happiness. In late August, when Hannah was 8 months along, Kenneth surprised her with a gift. He had converted one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery with a handmade cradle, a rocking chair, and a chest of drawers for the baby's things. Hannah stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face as she took it all in. "Kenneth," she breathed, "this is beautiful." "A baby should have a proper room," Kenneth said, looking pleased with her reaction. "I made the cradle myself. It is a little rough maybe, but it is sturdy." Hannah walked over to the cradle and ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "It is perfect. Everything is perfect. You are perfect." Kenneth wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands settling on her belly. "Not perfect, but I am trying my best to be the husband and father we both need." "You already are," Hannah whispered, leaning back against his solid strength. The baby came 3 weeks later on a warm September night. Hannah's labor started just after dinner, and Kenneth sent one of the hands racing to town for the doctor. Mrs. Bailey stayed with Hannah, offering comfort and encouragement, while Kenneth paced the hallway outside the bedroom, nearly wearing a hole in the floorboards. It was a long, hard labor, and more than once Kenneth burst into the room despite Mrs. Bailey's protests, unable to stay away when he heard Hannah cry out. "I am here," he would say, taking her hand. "I am right here. You are doing so well." Finally, just as dawn was breaking, the baby arrived. A boy, healthy and loud, with a shock of dark hair and a pair of lungs that worked perfectly. The doctor cleaned him up and handed him to Hannah, who looked down at her son with tears streaming down her face. "He is perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Kenneth sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the baby with an expression of wonder. "He really is. What should we name him?" They had discussed names before, unable to agree on anything. But now, looking at her husband and her son, Hannah knew. "I would like to name him after you, Kenneth." "If that is all right. We could call him Kit for short," Kenneth said, his voice thick with emotion. "Kenneth is too big a name for such a small person." "Kit Zachary," Hannah said, testing the name. "I like that." Kenneth reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. Kit immediately grabbed his finger with a surprisingly strong grip, and Kenneth let out a shaky laugh. "He has got a good grip. He is going to be a rancher for sure." The first few weeks with a newborn were exhausting but joyful. Hannah was grateful for Mrs. Bailey's help, and for Kenneth's willingness to get up in the middle of the night to walk with Kit when he was fussy. Kenneth was completely smitten with his son, spending every free moment holding him, talking to him, showing him around the ranch. "He is too young to understand anything you are saying," Hannah said one afternoon, amused, as she watched Kenneth give Kit a tour of the barn. "Never too early to start learning," Kenneth said seriously, though his eyes were twinkling. "He needs to know what is what." Hannah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. This was her life now. This beautiful, improbable, wonderful life. The town began to come around slowly. It was hard to maintain righteous indignation when Kenneth Zachary, one of the most respected men in the area, was clearly devoted to his wife and son. Women who had once crossed the street to avoid Hannah now nodded politely when they passed. Some even began to speak to her, making small talk about babies and the weather. It was not a full acceptance, perhaps, but it was progress. And Hannah found that she cared less and less what the town thought. She had Kenneth and Kit and Prudence and Mrs. Bailey. She had people who loved her. That was enough. When Kit was 3 months old, Hannah and Kenneth took him to visit Prudence at the boarding house. Prudence cooed over the baby, declaring him the handsomest child she had ever seen. As Hannah watched her stern aunt melt into a puddle of affection over little Kit, she marveled at how much her life had changed. "I am grateful I came here," Hannah told Prudence. "I was terrified when I arrived. I expected you to turn me away." "I almost did," Prudence admitted. "But blood is blood, and I am glad I did not. Look at you now, married to a good man with a beautiful baby. You have built yourself a good life, Hannah." "I have," Hannah agreed. "A better life than I ever dared hope for." That evening, back at the ranch, Hannah stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Kenneth came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I thought possible," Hannah admitted. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that you chose me, that we have Kit, that I have this life." "It is real," Kenneth assured her, "and it is going to keep getting better, I promise you that." "I love you," Hannah said, turning in his arms to face him. "I do not think I tell you that enough, but I do. I love you so much." "I love you too," Kenneth said, and kissed her with a tenderness that still made her heart race. "You and Kit are everything to me. Everything." The years passed gently. Kit grew from a baby into a curious, active toddler who followed Kenneth around the ranch like a small shadow. Hannah bloomed in the security of Kenneth's love, her confidence growing as she took on more responsibilities around the ranch. She became known as a skilled cook, and Mrs. Bailey eventually retired, leaving Hannah to run the household on her own. When Kit was 2, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. Kenneth was overjoyed, though he fretted constantly about Hannah's health, remembering how difficult Kit's birth had been. But this pregnancy was easier, and when their daughter was born in the spring of 1885, the labor was quick and uncomplicated. They named her Rose, and she was a perfect baby, with auburn hair like Hannah's and her father's honey-colored eyes. Kit was fascinated by his little sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help take care of her. As Hannah held her daughter and watched Kenneth play with Kit on the floor of the nursery, she marveled at the life she had built. 3 years ago, she had arrived in Salida broken and ashamed, expecting nothing but rejection. Instead, she had found a man who saw past her mistakes to the person she truly was. A man who had given her not just acceptance, but devotion. A man who had made her his wife, had claimed her child as his own, and had given her a family and a home. "What are you thinking about?" Kenneth asked, noticing her watching them. "How lucky I am," Hannah said simply. "How grateful." "I am the lucky one," Kenneth countered. "You gave me a family, a real family. Before you, this house was just a place I lived. You made it a home." 2 more children followed over the next few years. Another son they named Daniel after Kenneth's faithful ranch hand, and then another daughter they named Prudence, after Hannah's aunt. The house was always full of noise and laughter and the chaos that came with raising 4 young children. Prudence, the elder, delighted in her namesake, visiting often and spoiling all the children outrageously. Mrs. Bailey, though retired, still came by regularly to visit and help with the baking. The ranch prospered under Kenneth's steady management, and Hannah's role as his partner grew. She kept the books, managed the household, and even had a say in business decisions. As Kit grew older, he began to ask questions about why he looked different from his siblings, why he had lighter hair and different features. Hannah and Kenneth had always planned to tell him the truth when he was old enough to understand, and when he was 10 years old, they sat him down and explained. "You grew in my belly," Hannah told him gently, "but your biological father was a man I knew before I met your papa. He made promises he did not keep, and he left before you were born. But Papa has been your father since before you were born. He chose to be your papa. He chose to love you. That makes him your real father in all the ways that matter." Kit processed this information seriously. Then he looked at Kenneth and asked, "Do you love me different than the others because I am not really yours?" Kenneth pulled Kit onto his lap, despite the boy's protests that he was too old for such things. "You listen to me, son. You are mine. You have been mine since the moment I decided to marry your mama. You are my firstborn, my boy, and I love you every bit as much as I love Rose and Daniel and little Prudence. Blood does not make a family. Love does." Kit hugged Kenneth tightly, and Hannah wiped away tears as she watched the two most important males in her life hold each other. The truth did not change anything. Kit continued to shadow his father around the ranch, learning everything Kenneth could teach him about ranching and horses and being a good man. As he entered his teenage years, Kit began to take on more responsibilities, and it became clear that he would be an excellent rancher someday. Rose grew into a spirited girl who loved horses as much as her brothers and was not afraid to get dirty. Daniel was quiet and thoughtful, always with his nose in a book when he was not working. Little Prudence was the baby, spoiled by everyone but somehow unspoiled despite it, with a sunny disposition that brought joy wherever she went. On Hannah and Kenneth's 10th wedding anniversary, Kenneth surprised her with a trip to Denver, just the two of them. Prudence and Mrs. Bailey agreed to watch the children, and Hannah and Kenneth took the train to the city for a week of hotels and restaurants and theater performances. It was strange being away from the children, but also wonderful to have Kenneth all to herself. They walked through the city hand in hand like young sweethearts, and Hannah marveled at how lucky she was to be married to a man who still looked at her with such love after 10 years and 4 children. On their last night in Denver, they sat in their hotel room, and Kenneth gave her a small box wrapped in paper. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a chain. "Open it," Kenneth urged. Inside the locket were 2 tiny photographs, one of Kit and Rose, one of Daniel and Prudence. "So you can keep them close to your heart," Kenneth said, "the way you are always close to mine." Hannah threw her arms around his neck and kissed him. "I love you so much, I never get tired of saying it." "I never get tired of hearing it," Kenneth said, holding her close. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Hannah Zachary." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Hannah said. "You saved me, Kenneth. You gave me a life when I thought my life was over." "You saved yourself," Kenneth corrected. "You had the courage to keep going when everything was hard. You had the strength to build a new life. I just gave you a place to do it." They returned to the ranch to find the children had been perfect angels, according to Prudence, though Mrs. Bailey whispered that there might have been some minor incidents involving mud and the good linens. Hannah did not care. She gathered her children close and breathed in the familiar sense of home: hay and horses, fresh bread and mountain air. The years continued to pass in a happy blur. Kit grew into a fine young man, taking on more and more responsibility at the ranch, until he was practically running it alongside his father. When he was 21, he met a girl from a nearby ranch, fell head over heels in love, and asked permission to marry her. Kenneth and Hannah gave their blessing, thrilled to see their eldest so happy. Kit's wedding was a huge affair, with half the county in attendance. As Hannah watched her son pledge his life to his bride, she thought back to her own wedding, simple and small but no less meaningful. She caught Kenneth's eye across the room and smiled, and he smiled back. And in that moment, she knew he was thinking the same thing. Rose proved to have a talent for training horses, and by the time she was 18, people were coming from all over to have her work with their animals. She was in no hurry to marry, declaring that she loved her freedom too much, and Kenneth and Hannah supported her completely. Daniel surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to be a teacher. He went to school in Denver and came back to Salida to teach at the local schoolhouse, bringing education and books to the children of the area. Hannah was so proud she could hardly stand it, Little Prudence grew into a beautiful young woman with a kind heart and her mother's talent for cooking. She married a young lawyer in town when she was 19, and Hannah cried through the entire wedding, unable to believe her baby was old enough to be married. As Hannah and Kenneth entered their 50s, the ranch was still thriving. Kit and his wife had blessed them with 3 grandchildren, with another on the way. Rose finally married a cowboy from Montana who was her equal in stubbornness and skill with horses. Daniel married a fellow teacher, a quiet woman who loved books as much as he did. Prudence and her husband had 2 children and were talking about having more one evening. Hannah and Kenneth sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. Hannah leaned her head on Kenneth's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor for over 20 years. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Marrying me, taking on the scandal and the gossip." Kenneth turned to look at her, his honey-colored eyes as warm as ever. "Not for one single second. You gave me everything, Hannah. A family, a purpose, a reason to come home every night. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," Hannah said. "You gave me acceptance when I expected rejection. You gave me devotion when I thought I deserved nothing. You gave me love when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me everything, Kenneth. Everything." Kenneth kissed her temple gently. "We gave each other everything." That is what marriage is supposed to be. They sat together in the fading light, watching as the stars began to appear one by one in the vast Colorado sky. Inside the house, Hannah could hear the sounds of their granddaughter practicing piano, the tinkling notes drifting out through the open windows. Tomorrow, Kit and his family were coming for Sunday dinner. Rose would probably show up unexpected, as she often did, with a new horse she wanted to show off. Daniel would bring books for everyone. Prudence would arrive with some new recipe she wanted her mother to try. The house would be full of noise and laughter and life, just as it had been for over 2 decades. Full of the family Hannah had built with Kenneth, the family that had started with a desperate pregnant woman arriving in a strange town, expecting rejection, and a cowboy who had looked past her circumstances to see the woman beneath. As Hannah sat beside her husband on the porch of their home, surrounded by the mountains and the land they loved, with their children and grandchildren filling their lives with joy, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had been looking for all along. Not just acceptance, though Kenneth had given her that. Not just devotion, though he had shown her that every day of their marriage. She had found home. She had found belonging. She had found a love that was patient and kind and strong enough to weather any storm. She had found a man who saw her not as a mistake or a scandal, but as a woman worthy of love and respect and partnership. She had arrived expecting rejection. Kenneth had given her acceptance and devotion. And together, they had built a life more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars blazed overhead, Hannah squeezed Kenneth's hand and he squeezed back, and no words were necessary. They had said everything that mattered years ago, and they had spent every day since proving those words true. They would continue to do so for whatever years remained to them, growing old together on this ranch they loved, surrounded by the family they had built. It was not the life Hannah had imagined for herself when she boarded that stagecoach in Philadelphia all those years ago. It was better. So much better. And she was grateful for every single moment of it.